Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film my wrap up of my reading and my rankings for the BookTube Prize semifinal round in nonfiction. This was a wonderful reading experience. I had 6 books assigned to me in Group B for the nonfiction, and let me just give you the names of those books right now. This is in the order that I read them. The Only Plane in the Sky by Garrett M. Graff, No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder, In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb, Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell. So these 6 books were the ones that were assigned to me 2 months ago, and I read through them. And they were all fantastic books. I just want to say that up front. I am going to give you my rankings and talk about my impressions of these books, but I just want to say right up front that this was a really, really strong group for me. All of these books were good. Some of them were excellent 5-star reads, but even the ones that I've ranked below, the last 3 slots, which I didn't vote to go through to the next round of the BookTube Prize, are still good books. These all are worth your time. And I'll explain how I put them in order now. So starting from 6th place and working my way back up to 1st place, in number 6th place, I put In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. Now, this is a collection of essays, basically, all framed from the point of view of fairy tale mythology. So Carmen Maria Machado is a lesbian, and she, well, I shouldn't say she's a lesbian. She is queer. She's a queer person. And in this book, she is describing a relationship that she was a part of with her first wife, in which her wife was very abusive to her, very emotionally and mentally abusive to her. And that theme is very compelling and also really important because it's not something that's talked about very much. But the way that the book is framed is that each short essay, and they are very short, most of them are less than a page long, maybe a page and a half long, are framed around some archetype or some mythology from fairy tales. And so the dream house as horror story, the dream house as whatever, and then Machado will relate an incident or an episode in her relationship with her first wife. And so while the theme was really important and compelling to me, my problem with this book is it read very much like her earlier short story collection. It's very creative, let's say, and I really question if it's nonfiction or not. To me, much of this is not nonfiction. It's creative writing, and it certainly is true in that Machado experienced some really traumatic things in her relationship with this woman, but it also reads very much like short stories. So that was my main problem with this. Also, Machado tries really hard sometimes. Like, it just feels like she's stretching to grab a metaphor or to be really creative with her language in a way that doesn't propel the story forward, or especially for nonfiction, give us the facts that we need to know about that story. So that's why that book landed in 6th place for me. In 5th place was a work of history nonfiction, and that is A Woman of No Importance. This is all about a woman named Virginia Hall, who was the first female spy sent behind enemy lines in France to help organize the resistance during World War II. Virginia Hall had been very interested in becoming some kind of a diplomat, but many of the avenues to working in the field of diplomacy were closed to her because of her gender. She was an American citizen, and the Americans were particularly not open to the idea of women working in the fields that she wanted to work in. So when the war started, she was approached as potentially becoming a spy for Great Britain and going behind enemy lines in France to work to organize the resistance. And she leapt at the chance. and she was extremely good at her job. So she stayed behind enemy lines working for the British for quite a long time, almost a year, for the first go round. And then she was exposed and the Nazis found out who she was, and she had to come back out of France. And then she was advocating to go back in. She didn't feel her work was done. She wanted to get back onto the front lines and to continue to work to develop the resistance in France. And so she ends up joining the precursor to the CIA, the OSS, for the Americans, because her cover was blown for the British. So she goes back into France working for the Americans, and again is very successful. And the war comes to an end. She returns back to the U.S. and it's about what happens to her after the war as well. Normally, I do not love World War II books, so that was a strike against this book for me. This was a very compelling read, again, about a topic I knew nothing about. Virginia Hall has to fight misogyny and sexism every step of the way, even when she's constantly proving how adept and amazing she is as a spy. The powers that be don't want to send her back to France or don't want her in the field because she's a woman. And she just continually fights to overcome all of this. Not only this, but she's doing it all with only one leg. She has a prosthetic leg, and she did not injure herself while she was a spy. She injured herself previous to that. So not only is she a woman working behind enemy lines as the first female spy, she is doing it disabled. She was just an amazing, amazing person. And the U.S., as per typical, did not recognize her for far, far too long for her contributions to the war. And then after the war, I don't want to go into it because it's a spoiler, even though historical record, but let's just say very frustrating to read. The other thing that knocked this book down a little bit for me was it could get overly detailed and repetitive in parts, especially in the beginning when she's working to get her network set up in France. And there's a lot of things that happen seemingly over and over again, and that can feel a bit repetitive. But otherwise than that, really great story, and really amazing woman who was incredibly interesting to read about. Now, in fourth position was a book that I truly enjoyed, and that is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. This is Gottlieb's memoir of her time. She's a therapist, so it's about her experience being a therapist and also about her experience being in therapy. She ends up getting her own therapist and going through therapy after a breakup with a long-term partner. And so she's trying to process her feelings and her issues with that. All the while she's telling us case studies, basically, obviously with all the details removed so we can't figure out who these people are, about her own work as a therapist and what she's learned during her time as a therapist. I did not think I was going to like this book. It didn't sound like a book that I would be interested in. I'm not normally into like sort of self-help type books. Don't know much about talk therapy or any of that field. So really wasn't too interested in it before the BookTube Prize. And this book was way more than I expected. It was interesting. It was funny. It was heartwarming. It was poignant. It was heartbreaking. Just amazing. I learned so much about talk therapy and how it works and why therapists use the techniques that they use. And I thought Gottlieb really put herself on the line to be honest and open with her own experiences in therapy, and just goes to show you that even therapists, people who are therapists, lie to their own therapist in order not to have to acknowledge things that they're doing that they know are harmful or problematic. So this book was just more than I expected, and I really, really loved it. Then in third place was a book that broke my heart, and that's Know My Name by Chanel Miller. Of course, Chanel Miller is Emily Doe, I guess, or Jane Doe. I can't remember what the word was, or the name was they used for her. She was the woman who, while unconscious at a frat party in Berkeley, was sexually assaulted by a young man who was attending college there. And I've just blanked on his name, and it's okay because we don't need to know his name. We need to know her name. He just assaulted her while she was unconscious, and the only reason he stopped assaulting her was because two young men rode by on a bicycle and dragged him off of her and sat on him until the police came. Chanel wakes up in a hospital with no knowledge of how she got there or what's happened to her. And this story picks up at that moment when she wakes up in the hospital. And in her own words, she tells the story of finding out what happened to her, and then proceeding through the legal system while she tries to bring her attacker to justice. I listened to this book as an audiobook. Chanel Miller narrates it herself. It is powerful. It will wreck you emotionally, and everybody should read this book, and then nobody will ever question again why women don't report when they are sexually assaulted and raped. Because what this woman is put through by our legal system is atrocious, is heartbreaking, is every negative emotion you can imagine. And she just is expected to relive her trauma over and over again. It takes 3 years and 8 months for the trial to be over. And I won't say justice is served, because justice is not served in this case, as anybody knows. And it wasn't Berkeley, it was Stanford. I apologize for that. Because we've all heard of the Stanford swimmer, and the fact that the legal system and other adults who should know better were more concerned with how it was going to impact his life and his career as a swimmer than they were about this young woman who was assaulted and what impact it would have on her life. Even now, talking about this book makes me so angry. And I also want to know that at the very end of the book, Chanel Miller reads her victim statement that she read out in court at the end of the trial, her victim statement that she reads to her attacker and to the judge. And it was the most amazing thing. I can't believe how brave she was, honestly. I cannot believe how brave this young woman was. And I really hope that she continues on the path that she's on of being a writer, because she is an unbelievable author. And I am really excited to see what she does next. Then in the second place in this amazing group of books was The Only Plane in the Sky, which is the oral history of 9/11. Again, another book that I was not really interested in reading. I lived through 9/11. I was a young mom. My second child had only been born in April prior to September 11th. I had a 3.5-year-old and an infant, and I was at work when my mother called me and told me that somebody had just flown a plane into the Twin Towers. And I can remember coming home and turning on the TV and just watching that footage over and over again. And I just did not want to relive that day at all. And this book is interviews and excerpts from transcripts and excerpts from reports, and even recordings from the voice recorders in the cockpits of the hijacked planes. And it is an emotional roller coaster. I listened to this one on audio as well. And you hear recordings of when the stewardesses call the flight control people and explain what's happening. You hear voice recordings from passengers on those planes who call their loved ones. You are listening to interviews with the people left behind. You're listening to interviews with people who made it out of the Twin Towers, interviews with people who were emergency rescue workers, police, firemen, ambulance people, EMTs, all of those kind of people. And it all takes place within a 24-hour period. And even though you know what is the end result of this is going to be, like, the emotional impact of that is just non-stop. It just hits you and hits you and hits you. And I will say also that even while listening to this, my heart was racing. I had adrenaline rush the whole time. I would listen to this for a while and I would have to shut the book off because my heart would be racing so fast. I was like, okay, I got to have a break because, you can only take so much adrenaline. And then I would be crying. I would be, just all the emotions. But so I was afraid to experience that again. but I also think this is such an important book. I learned so many things that I never knew, because at some point, you just shut down for any new information that's being provided about this historic event. And so it was really eye-opening to me, some of the information that I learned. And really, there were so many heroes who became part of our sort of cultural consciousness during that day. And I don't want to take anything away from that, but I will say the book is very much focused on the hero aspect of that day, and is not interested in critiquing any responses of our government or any responses of the different agencies involved or anything like that. This book is not about critique. This book is about celebrating the heroes that stepped forward that day, and is about remembering the victims, and the regular people who were impacted on this day. So if that's something that's important to you, is sort of critiquing the response and how that response sort of moved forward, how we moved forward as a country after 9/11. This book does none of that. It's 24 hours, and it's really focused on the heroic actions of people. So just know that going in, but it was extremely powerful and really well done on audio. Really, really well done. And I should also say that each interviewee or each person who is, whether they're being quoted from a report or a transcript or whatever, it's a different voice. So it's a multi narrator cast for that audiobook. It's just amazing. So that leaves us with, in the first place, No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder, which is a nonfiction, more of a traditional nonfiction about domestic violence. And I have not read very much specifically about domestic violence. And this book was just simply stunning. It was such an amazing book. It's basically a journalistic nonfiction where Snyder does a ton of research and just looks at this one topic for a long period of time, and then pulls everything together. Case studies, statistics and facts, personal experience, everything into this one narrative nonfiction book that sort of takes you through several individual case studies while also looking at the big picture of domestic violence and how we deal with domestic violence in the United States. It's very compelling and engaging. I found it incredibly intellectually stimulating. I felt like the whole time I was reading this book, the synapses in my brain were like connecting things, disparate things that you wouldn't think you would be thinking about when you're reading a book about domestic violence. But I kept thinking about different processes and systems of analysis and ways of approaching problem solving that they were learning over, a 20 and 30 and 40 year period with domestic violence response that I could apply to my own work in the natural sciences. And I love it when nonfiction does that. When nonfiction makes connections for me between very disparate fields of study, and then I can take those lessons away with me and apply them in other areas of my life. To me, that intellectual engagement that comes from reading nonfiction and what it stimulates me to think about in terms of other topics is why I love nonfiction. And this book did it for me in spades, while also educating me about domestic violence. And honestly, if I didn't love my current job so much, I might be considering retraining and going to work in that field of helping people who are suffering from situations which they're being abused by their partners or in the home. And I was blown away by this book. I can't recommend it highly enough. I'm so thrilled that it made it through into the next round of the BookTube prize. So, I was surprised that In the Dream House made it through. If we're talking about the books that made it through into the next round, you will see I picked In the Dream House as my number 6 book, and that is one of the 3 that made it through. The other 2 from my group that made it through was Know My Name and No Visible Bruises, and I think I am super thrilled about all those. And like I said, my quibble with In the Dream House is I don't think it's truly nonfiction. So that's my little review and wrap up of my reading for the nonfiction round semifinals for the BookTube prize. I will be reading and judging fiction for the final round. So I have 4 books to read. I've only read 2 of the fiction, 6 books of fiction that are left. I want to, as always, thank Robert from Barter Hordes for all of his hard work in organizing and making sure all of this ranking and the judging process happens smoothly. He is doing a tremendous job. So thanks again, Robert, for that. It's super fun to participate in this BookTube prize. And I just want to encourage any of you who are watching that are not judging this year to please sign up to judge in 2021, because it is a tremendously good time and you will be exposed to books that you might not otherwise read, which is really fun and enlightening. So that's it. I hope you are all doing well, and I will talk to you later.